this level, he knows the insides and out of Texas Tech. RedRaidersports.com, also a radio show in the Lubbock area as well. And Double T, Texas and Oklahoma have sent their letter to the SEC, and the SEC, of course, has acknowledged it. What's going on in Lubbock right now? What's the feeling in Lubbock, Texas?
Well, I mean, I think like everybody else, still trying to process what's next. I think there's a couple of different phases here that everybody's going to operate under, Texas Tech included. And I think in the short term, it's all about keeping this thing together and all those things, so you can, stay under, your current TV deal, and you can recoup the money that Oklahoma and Texas owe you. But all the while, as we all know, everybody's off to the side. Okay, what now? What do we do? Where do we want to go? How can we get there? What's our future past 2025? And I'd love to skip to the end and know exactly what that was going to look like for not just Texas Tech, but all of these 8 schools. But I think that, it just depends on who you believe and kind of what hour or day it is, honestly, on how this thing plays out. I mean, I think that the most likely scenarios for Texas Tech are probably head west or stay together with some or all of these schools and try to put together a different looking league. That seems to be the two, but I just don't know how much that, what's that worth to a rights holder, and you may take a huge step back if that were the case. And I can't tell you that the Pac-12, that there's some big giant payday, available there, but that may be best case scenario based on how you've been living in the last 10 years or so, money-wise.
Yeah, and it's interesting, in whenever these realignment things have come up before, even back when the Big 12 was formed, when the Big 8 was okay, and the Southwest Conference was, under all this whatever upheaval, it seems like there's always been tie-ins politically. There's been somebody attached to somebody's hip. There's been power within the legislature. All that seems to be out the window. Like there's no, like it is. Texas Tech has always been connected to Texas, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Baylor, and I don't know if anyone. There doesn't seem to be any of that. Oklahoma and Texas are doing what's best for them, and fine. That's their prerogative. They're in that position to be able to do so. How hard is it going to be for like Texas Tech and TCU, Oklahoma State, Baylor, among others, to understand and trust each other going forward?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. You start looking around, and it's like, okay, who's my ally, and does this ally help me or does it hurt me? I mean, there's all different ways to view this stuff. I do know enough to tell you that I do think it's not something official, but I do think there's a lot of conversations going on between Texas Tech and Oklahoma State. Obviously, their athletic director, Chad Weiberg, worked here under Kirby Hocutt for 2 or 3 years. I think that if Texas Tech was looking for an ally, somebody to hold, it would be Oklahoma State, and I think vice versa. I've heard enough from Stillwater. But, again, so I'm clear, each institution will likely do what is for them. But if it benefits you that we're somewhat together, does that help us? If it does, then I think you'll see that continue. But, I mean, I do think that the 3 Texas schools and Oklahoma State, there's probably some benefit to sticking together and whatever you do, just getting into this Oklahoma-Texas market, if you will. But I wish I knew, ultimately how this thing plays out. But it's scary, and I think to your point, David, the main thing that all of these schools are starting to understand right now is nobody is coming to help you. You have got to, fix this yourself and put yourself in the best position. Nobody's going to come bail you out, but I do think that, if you can extend a hand and an olive branch to somebody that it may benefit your situation and theirs, then they would certainly look to do that. But, yeah, you're right. Trust is going to be key, and it's probably not going to be easy to form based on what we've seen in the last week.
That the only way they can survive is if they completely stop status quo and look outside the box and find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think because ultimately we're sitting here talking about what is Texas Tech or what is Baylor or what are they going to do or what is the Pac-12 going to do? Or whatever conference you want to name. Ultimately, this is going to come down to like the rights holders. They're going to ultimately decide do we want to play in this space? Okay, and if so, what are these institutions worth? Whether it's merging conferences, whether it's this conference staying together and you're adding to it, like what is that worth to us? Whether it's Hulu or Netflix or Peacock or whatever you're talking about, like on all the different streaming services, there's a million of them. It seems like who wants to operate in that space and how much are they willing to pay? And is it worth it for us to pursue those angles? But they're going to be the ones that ultimately decide this. And you're right. If you're these leagues and you're Bowlesby or you're the new commissioner of the Pac-12, yeah, you're seeking that out. You're trying to gain as much information as you can and then leverage that information and possibly create some sort of mini bidding war. But yeah, the rights and like so, ESPN has kind of got this this lock on the SEC and the ACC. Well, Fox is obviously under contract with the Big Ten and the Pac-12, and then to a certain extent the Big 12. Well, what does Fox want to do? Do they want to play ball? Do they want to compete with ESPN, or do they want to say, you know what, this is a little rich for our blood. We're already paying all this money to the NFL. We don't really want to do this anymore. I mean, they're ultimately going to decide this.
As a guy like yourself and like me or whoever's watching this show, no matter where they are around the country, whoever their favorite college football team is, yeah, the big people get to eat everything up like Walmart or the conglomerates, right? They go in a small town and they take the local person out of the mix because they can do that with mass amount of production and price. Are you worried about college football in general?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, I think it's not just worry, and it makes us sound older, okay, when we talk about it in these terms, but it's just changing, and it's not what it was, and that's the fun part about why we do this is the passion, and then you get the regional rivalries and all the different things that come with it, and a lot of that's going to get just destroyed, you know. And obviously, you're right. Texas, Oklahoma did what's best for them. I mean, it's not best for the sport when Oklahoma and Oklahoma State aren't playing. It wasn't best for the sport when Texas and Texas A&M weren't playing. It's not, you know, and you can argue that but it's what's best for those institutions in the long term, and I certainly understand that. But as a you know, somebody that's just sitting by idle and looking at it from while we all love this stuff, it's not great. Absolutely not.
Let's say whether it's a year from now or it's 3 years from now, what do you think the options are in order? I know what priority would be, but what do you think in the end is going to be the end game?
Yeah, well, that's loaded question there. I mean, it just is, because it seems like it changes so much. Okay, so in this way, I would answer it that I think that in some ways this is going to be when all of this stops, whenever that is, whether it's next week or 2 years from now. This is more than likely the last major round of realignment. Okay, I think whatever we see happen in the next month to 2 years is really when it stops. And do the other conferences, because the news of this week was not great news for the ACC, the Big Ten, or the Pac-12, much less the Big 12, because you could potentially see the SEC kind of get further and further away and widen the gap. The Big Ten, we would all agree, is probably next best to compete there, but it's still not great news for them because unless you merge the Pac-12 with the Big Ten or something, it's just hard to compete with that part of the country and with what ESPN is paying out, which could approach $60 million or something a year is what we've seen. So if you're Texas Tech and if you're Baylor, you have to hope that these conference commissioners and that some rights holders are interested in saying, we don't want to see a lot of this go away. We want to play ball. We want to, and whether you start meshing leagues together, it doesn't mean that you're going to play each other per se. It's about a rights holder agreement. Mm-hmm. You can put a 20-team league together if the rights holder views that that's it's valuable to me. I want to scoop that up. But it doesn't mean we have to create this nice and tidy league where everybody plays everybody and all these different things. It's about, grouping schools together that gives us, media rights that are worth something and that people want to watch and pay attention to. But, all the talk about, these 8 schools that are in the Big 12, can't they just call up Nebraska, or can't they call up the Arizona schools or get Arkansas? None of those schools are going to leave, where they're at because they've got stability. They're making money more than likely that's on par or what it was what the Big 12 was making. So that's just unrealistic. But at the end of the day, I think if you're the three Texas schools and you're Oklahoma State, you really have to have an eye out west. That just seems like, and USC may decide that. If the Pac-12 commissioner wants to keep USC happy and not get poached or be a part of some bigger merger, and USC wants to get into the Texas market so they can recruit and do some of the same things that the SEC folks wanted to, then you're in pretty good shape, as far as going out west. But what does ultimately that look like? How many schools does that involve? I'm not sure. But the other thing is just keeping these schools together and trying to add to it. But I just don't know what value that is to a rights holder at the end of the day, whether we're talking Cincinnati or Central Florida or whatever. And sorry to be long-winded, but it's just there's a lot to it, and it's not exactly, option A, B, C, and D. There's so many caveats to all this stuff, but ultimately rights holders will determine it.
All right, Chris, I have one more question about the amount of money that Tech, Kansas State, Baylor, TCU, they have spent millions to try to stay in the game. Everyone's expanded. Not that they could ever catch Texas and Oklahoma with their power and their might. If they don't find out some way to stay in where you get 30+ million a year, what happens to all the money that's been committed to keep these facilities where they are to stay as a Division I or Power 5 school?
Well, you ultimately end up having coaches in really, really nice facilities that are only making about, $500,000 to $1 million.
Yeah.
As opposed to $3 and $4 and $5 million. Because if you think about it, all of these coordinators, the trickle down, all of these coordinators and the beat up staffs and all these things that football and basketball, Texas Tech's paying their baseball coach about $1 million, I think a little bit more than that. The math doesn't work. And you simply can't operate like you used to. The facilities don't change. You maybe end up in a situation where you're in some league and you've got the best facilities in that league, which gives you some sort of benefit, but you can't afford to pay your coaches anywhere near what you have been paying. And keeping coaches, keeping coordinators, keeping whatever. You just operate like a group of five, unfortunately. That's the harsh reality of it, and that's the scary thought. And that's what all these schools are working very hard to try to, to prohibit from happening. But, unless you can land somewhere that you get near or close to that money, you're going to have to make some serious changes.
Chris Level, publisher, RedRaidersports.com, co-host, of course, in the afternoon. Same time we're on, Double T 97.3. Appreciate your time, man.
Hey, Smokey, appreciate the time, brother. Keep hope alive, and we'll just see how this thing plays out, my man.
This is SicEm365 Radio.
One of the text line messages was Texas Tech fans are right now on a certain watch because they lost Chris Beard a few months ago, and now with the possibility of what's going on right now with Texas Tech football and the